Joining me now is a former chief economist at the Italian Finance Ministry, Lorenzo Codogno. Lorenzo, the Italian economy wasn't the strongest in Europe before this pandemic. What effect is it having on the economy, and what effect could it have?
I mean, the short answer is a massive impact because keep in mind, as you mentioned, Italy was not in a very strong position before the crisis. Actually, there was a contraction already in the fourth quarter of last year. It was a quarter-on-quarter contraction by 0.3%. Now, at the beginning of this year, there was some rebound, but then the crisis hit. The first impact came from the supply chain and was China, mainly China. Then you got the first cases in Italy, and there was the first lockdown in very specific areas in the country, 14 provinces. And that ended up in a kind of limited economic impact. Then I think the next step was when the government decided to lock down the whole country, which was on the 9th of March. And then over the weekend, the government decided to tighten the mobility restrictions and close down all companies, all factories, all businesses that are perceived to be non-essential. So I think at this stage, we could expect a big chunk of the economy not to be functioning. And so the economic damage is going to be massive. I haven't published a full forecast yet, but you can expect something in the range between 8% and 10% contraction for the whole year. So it's going to be massive. Of course, you have to make very heroic assumptions on how the disease and the contagion will evolve in the future. But again, making reasonable assumptions, it's going to be massive.
So what is the government doing or saying to try and reassure people, not just about the current crisis, but that there will be jobs to go back to when it's over?
Well, I think the policy reaction, although there was a bit of a confusion initially and a lack of clear responsibility in responding to the crisis, but now I think it's pretty established. There is a very clear line of command, and the government is fully on board on the response. The response is twofold. On the one hand, you have the domestic response, which is clearly purely fiscal. And the government already introduced 25 billion of fiscal stimulus, which basically aims to protect the workers and the businesses that will inevitably suffer at least a few months of disruptions. This package will likely increase because sometimes they finance only 1 or 2 months. And so there will be a need to refinance this package. So I'm expecting an overall bill which is probably in excess of 50 billion. Secondly, you have the policy response by the ECB, which is also quite important because it provides liquidity and it provides support in the bond market. So it makes sure that conditions remain stable and there is no major disruption in financial markets, but also for banks and therefore for credit to the companies. And then we are still waiting for the European response, which is not fully complete, I would say.
No, there has been criticism of the European response. You mentioned the ECB, and the ECB, European Central Bank, has launched its so-called Pandemic Emergency Purchase Programme. Does that go far enough? Is that enough?
Well, I think Christine Lagarde was a bit reluctant to go immediately for monetary policy because she wanted to put pressure on governments to deliver fiscally first. But then it wasn't particularly successful. So she tried to introduce a broad package initially, which to me was well designed, but it wasn't powerful enough. The initial amount of asset purchase program was only 120 billion, and it was time limited. Then the ECB, and by the way, the Lagarde made also the unlucky and unfortunate comment on spreads. Then the ECB had to come back, and this time the package is big because on top of the previous package, the ECB had 750 billion, which without a clear time limit. So at the end of the day, I think it can be considered as unlimited because it can be extended or increased if there is a need for that, and that was made clear by the ECB. So I think the response by now is appropriate and sufficiently strong.
Even some conservative estimates believe this is going to cost at least $1 trillion. But is there any sort of is there a reassuring element to that, insofar as we are all in the same boat? We are all, almost all, in lockdown or shutting our economies down.
Yeah, I think the big question mark here is how long it's going to last, not just in Italy, globally. Because if it is just 2 or 3 months, then the economy can bounce back, and the damage on the supply side might be limited. If instead it's a more prolonged effect, then you might see problems because companies might start going under, there might be firing of workers, and then the economic problems would actually unfold. So I think it very much is a call on the duration and extent of the crisis, which at the moment is still uncertain. So we can make a reasonable, a kind of educated guess, say that it's going to last for another couple of months in terms of lockdown globally, and then you have maybe another 1 or 2 months of kind of cooling period after the shock, and then the second half of the year we can expect some rebound. But again, it's very uncertain at the moment.
One economist described Italy as Europe's canary in the coal mine, insofar as the post-COVID economy. Is that how you see it?
Well, I think there is a deep problem in terms of how Europe has responded to this crisis. As we mentioned at the beginning, there is still a problem in terms of proper fiscal response at European level. There is no safe asset that can kind of shield any tension in terms of government bond yields. There is no central fiscal capacity. These are still open issues. Now there could be some surrogates that can allow Europe to have a lender of last resort, which is the ECB, can have a big fiscal package, loosely coordinated at European level. But still, I think there are a number of things that need to be fixed at European level in order to allow the whole area, particularly the Eurozone, to have the capacity to respond to shocks, economic shocks. And this is, again, very much an open issue for the future.
Lorenzo Codogno, many thanks to you. Always good to talk to you, and thanks for joining us on The Agenda.